The summer nights had always carried a hint of adventure for the students of Green Hollow High, but none quite like this one. It was late August, just before the new school year began, when Luke, Ava, and Jordan found themselves standing outside the gymnasium, flashlights in hand, nerves bubbling just beneath their skin. They hadn't planned on getting wrapped up in a mystery. Luke, a senior who prided himself on his curiosity, had first heard the strange noises during basketball practice. A rhythmic clanging that seemed to echo from beneath the polished hardwood floors of the gym. When he mentioned it to Ava, who was always up for an adventure, and Jordan, who didn't need much convincing if it meant avoiding summer homework, they decided to check it out. It started as a joke. Maybe a prank by the coach, or perhaps even rats. But the noises were too deliberate, too intentional. Luke described them as clinking chains and muffled groans, the kind that set his teeth on edge. That night, the three friends broke into the gym through a side door that didn't quite close all the way. The place was dark, but even in the dim light, the banners hanging on the walls, the bleachers, and the faded lines on the cord all seemed ordinary. It wasn't until Luke knelt on the floor where he'd heard the noises that he noticed something odd. A draft, cool air rising from a seam between two panels. "Look at this," he whispered, motioning for Ava and Jordan to join him. Ava knelt down beside him, her fingers tracing the seam. "There's definitely something under here," she replied, a mix of excitement and fear in her voice. Jordan rolled his eyes, pretending to be unimpressed. "It's probably just some storage," he said, though even he could hear the unease creeping into his tone. Luke found a crowbar in the storage room nearby, and after some convincing, they pried open the panel. It gave way with a groan, revealing a steep, narrow staircase descending into darkness. A foul, musty odor wafted up from below, and Ava gagged slightly, covering her nose. "What the hell is down there?" Jordan muttered, his bravado quickly fading. Luke aimed his flashlight into the opening, the beam revealing concrete walls lined with rusty pipes and a damp floor covered in dirt. They exchanged a nervous glance, but without a word, Luke began climbing down, Ava right behind him, and Jordan following reluctantly. The basement was larger than they expected, sprawling beneath the gym like a hidden labyrinth. Luke's flashlight danced over old equipment, dusty mats, broken weights, and something stranger, an area partitioned off by a patchwork of plywood and plastic sheets. As they approached, they could see a faint glow coming from within. Ava's breath caught in her throat. "Someone's living down here," she whispered. Luke pushed aside the plastic sheet, revealing what looked like a makeshift apartment. There was a cot, covered in a threadbare blanket, a table cluttered with cans of food, and even a small portable stove. A calendar from 2018 hung on the wall, each day crossed off meticulously. In one corner, a stack of books and a faded photo of a family, the edges curling with age, sat atop a crate. Jordan swallowed hard, the reality of the situation sinking in. This is real," he stammered. "Someone's actually living here." Suddenly they heard a noise, the unmistakable sound of footsteps echoing from the staircase they had just descended. Ava's eyes went wide, and she instinctively killed the beam of her flashlight, plunging them into darkness. They could hear the creak of the steps, each one slow, deliberate, as if whoever was approaching knew they had intruders. Luke motioned for them to stay quiet, his heart pounding so loudly, he was sure it would give them away. The footsteps stopped just outside the makeshift entrance, and for a moment, all they could hear was their own breathing and the distant hum of the school's electrical systems. Then, a voice. Low, gravelly, familiar. "Who's down here?" It was Mr. Halloway, the school custodian. The man everyone knew but never really noticed, always there, mopping the floors, cleaning up after games, his face lined with years of exhaustion. But there was something different in his voice now, an edge that none of them had heard before. Ava felt a chill run down her spine as she realized what this meant. Mr. Halloway had been living here, beneath the school, all this time. She could picture him, a man fallen into financial ruin, reduced to hiding in the shadows of the place he used to work. It made her stomach twist with a mix of fear and pity. Luke gestured for them to move, to try and sneak out, but the beam of a flashlight swept across the space, catching Ava's foot. "You shouldn't be here." Mr. Holloway's voice came again, closer now, more insistent. "You need to leave. Now." Luke stepped forward, his own flashlight now illuminating the custodian. The man looked wild, his eyes wide, his hair disheveled, holding a wrench in one hand. He looked both terrified and furious, like a cornered animal. "Mr. Holloway," Luke began, trying to keep his voice steady, "we didn't mean to. We just heard noises and wanted to see." The custodian took a step closer, his face twisting in anguish. "You don't understand," he said, his voice breaking. "This is all I have left. If they find out I've been here..." Ava felt her eyes welling with tears. The fear she had felt was now mixed with a deep sadness. This man wasn't a monster. He was desperate, broken, but the wrench in his hand and the look in his eyes told her that desperation could turn dangerous. "We won't tell anyone," she said quickly, her voice barely a whisper. "We promise, Mr. Holloway. We'll just leave and we won't say a word." There was a long, tense moment where the only sound was the dripping of water from one of the pipes. Then slowly, Mr. Holloway lowered the wrench, his shoulders sagging. "Go," he said, his voice hollow. "And don't come back." Luke didn't need to be told twice. He grabbed Ava's hand, pulling her toward the staircase, Jordan close behind. They climbed the steps as quickly and quietly as they could, not daring to look back. As they emerged back into the gym, the cool night air hit them, and they all took a deep breath as if they had been holding it for hours. They didn't speak as they left the school grounds, the weight of what they had discovered pressing down on them. It was only when they reached the safety of Luke's car that Ava finally broke the silence. "We can't tell anyone," she said, her voice trembling. He's just trying to survive." Jordan nodded, his face pale. "Yeah, but we're never going back there. Ever." Luke didn't say anything, just stared out the windshield at the dark silhouette of the school in the distance. The place that had always seemed so familiar, so safe, now held a secret that none of them would ever forget. Story 2. The school was always quiet after dusk, just the way I liked it. The kind of silence that could eat you alive if you weren't careful. The echo of my footsteps felt like an intrusion, and even the smallest sound seemed to bounce back at me from those long, empty corridors. I walked the halls, same routine every day. I'm just a janitor, after all. Nobody notices me, but I notice everything. That's when I first got this feeling. An itch in my brain like something wasn't right. Miss Davis, the third-grade teacher, was still in her classroom. Again. Every night, she stayed later than anyone else. Way too late for someone who had a life outside of here. Except maybe she didn't. Miss Davis was one of those people everyone seemed to love. Kids adored her. Parents trusted her. Staff looked up to her. She was always smiling, always helpful. Like she had it all figured out. But I don't trust people who act perfect all the time. It's like they're hiding something. And the longer she stayed after hours, the more I wondered why. Why did she linger when the school was empty? Why did she lock herself away when everyone else had gone home? So I started watching real close. Every night, I'd make sure to do my rounds near her classroom. She'd leave her room around 8 o'clock, lights off like she was heading home. But I never saw her leave the parking lot. Not once. The first couple of times, I thought I might have missed her. Maybe she was just quick or I was distracted, but it kept happening. She'd vanish from the classroom, but her car would still be sitting there, untouched, beneath the flickering streetlight. One night, curiosity got the better of me. I decided to check it out for myself. The hallway was dark except for the dim emergency lights. Miss Davis was gone, but her classroom door was cracked open just a bit. Weird. My heart thudded in my chest as I nudged the door open. The room looked normal. Desks neatly aligned, posters of multiplication tables pinned to the walls, the scent of chalk lingering in the air. Then I heard it. A creak, soft like someone trying not to be heard. My skin prickled, and I followed the sound to the supply closet at the back of the room. The door was ajar, just enough for me to see inside. I'd never really paid attention to that closet before, but something was different. I swung the door open wider, and my stomach dropped. There was a bed, a small makeshift one with a pillow and blanket. Clothes were hanging on hooks, half-eaten food containers were scattered across the floor, and a pile of notebooks lay stacked in the corner. She was living here. Miss Davis never left the school. I backed away, unsure of what to do. My breath caught in my throat, and a sense of dread settled in. I didn't tell anyone. What would I even say? But the next few days got weirder. Miss Davis seemed different. Unhinged, almost. Her once bright smile was forced, and there were dark circles under her eyes. She snapped at the kids for small things, things that never would have bothered her before. They said she'd forget their names or stare at them without saying anything. She was slipping, losing whatever grip she had left. One night, during my rounds, I found her there again. I peeked into her classroom, and the door to the supply closet was wide open. She was sitting inside, knees pulled to her chest, talking to herself. She didn't even notice me at first. Her voice was low, frantic, repeating the same words over and over. I have to stay. I have to watch them. They need me. I took a step back, and the floor creaked beneath me. Her head snapped up, her eyes locking onto mine. They were wild, desperate. Don't tell anyone, she whispered, her voice barely audible. I nodded, my throat dry, and slowly backed out of the room. I didn't tell anyone. Maybe I should have. Maybe things would have been different if I had. Then she disappeared. Just like that, gone. No one saw her leave. No note. Nothing. The cops looked into it, asked questions, but there were no leads. They didn't find her little hideout in the closet, and I didn't mention it. But I couldn't stop thinking about it. About her. About what she said. Weeks passed and life moved on. But the school felt different. Darker. Like her presence was still lingering. Then I started hearing things. Footsteps behind me when I locked up at night. A shadow darting just out of view. I kept telling myself it was my imagination, that the emptiness was getting to me. But one night, I felt it. Her hand on my shoulder. I spun around, my flashlight cutting through the darkness, but there was nothing. The hallway was empty, but I knew she was still here. It all came to a head when I decided to tear down that closet wall. I had to know. I had to see if she was hiding in there somewhere, if she'd somehow been trapped. I took a crowbar and pried at the edges, my hands trembling. The wood splintered and the panel fell away, revealing a hollow space behind it. My breath caught in my chest. There wasn't a woman. There was a journal, worn and stained, the pages covered in frantic, shaky handwriting. I flipped it open, my eyes scanning the words. I never left. I'm always watching. I live in the walls now. They're mine. My heart pounded in my ears as I dropped the journal, the pages fluttering shut. I ran. I didn't look back. But the truth hit me as I burst out of the school into the cold night air. She never left because she never could. She was part of the school now, in the walls, watching, always watching.